Alpha Waves Radio. Initializing now.
Welcome to Alpha Waves Radio. I'm your host, Michael Hinman. This is not an actual episode of Alpha Waves Radio, but it is because everything that you are about to see is real. It's not a... It's just kind of like... I guess that I was trying to explain exactly what Alpha Waves Radio was going to morph into with the video aspects and the audio aspects. And some of the people that I was explaining that to was like, but I don't get it, Mike. What exactly is the video going to be like? And as you know, we are going to release the audio versions of the show, just like what you used to hear in the first season and also in the previous iteration of Alpha Waves Radio. What we did is that we released a very well-produced, I would think, I hope so, well-produced audio versions of Alpha Waves Radio. And we're still going to do that, and you'll be able to hear some of that for free in the beginning, and then they'll kind of go into an archive that you'll be able to listen to in the future for like, I think it's like $5 a month or something really simple like that. But we're also offering a video aspect to the show, and the video aspect is going to be a little bit different because we're not going to be editing it in the same way as we do the audio version. So what you get in the video version is, probably a little more of the stumble over sentences, the various things that I might have cut out otherwise or intermixed a little bit, especially when we do interviews and things like that. It's a little more raw, I guess. And you also can see me, like if you are watching, you'd be seeing me right now, but if you're just listening, you're only hearing me, and you get to see other visuals as well. So the idea here was to talk a little bit about libel in terms of, and accuracy in the media. And joining me in that discussion is Carlos Pedraza, who is the host, or not the host, but host, I'm thinking about radio. He's the editor-in-chief and the publisher of Axamonitor.com, and this is a website designed to track what's happening with the fan film Axanar, the Star Trek fan film Axanar. This is the same fan film that had been sued a couple of years ago, or about 3 or 4 years ago now, by CBS for copyright infringement, and where there was a settlement at some point which basically allowed them to make their movie without raising any additional funds. They raised something like $1.7 million. They shouldn't have to raise any more funds, but apparently they do. But they can't use more modern means of doing it. But so he's so his website talks about that, and he recently got a cease and desist from an attorney that's representing Alec Peters, who's the man behind Axanar. And it's really interesting about how that whole thing came about. And so it was kind of news that was happening right now. Alpha Waves Radio isn't actually set to start. The second season isn't set to start until August 13th. We kind of have the first few shows already booked. And so it's like, man, if by the time I get to this, it's going to be like September. And I don't know, this will be like old news by then, and we'll be moved on to something else. So I thought, you know what? People are wondering what Alpha Waves Radio is going to look like as a video. I'm kind of curious to how it's going to look, and maybe this is an opportunity to work out some of the bugs and some of the other things that we don't have to then worry about, hopefully, once the second season starts. And I thought this would be something that I can offer for free to everybody. I think that the subject matter is very important, and I hope that you will too. And so that's what we're going to do. This is it. This is a special edition of Alpha Waves Radio, kind of a lost episode. Even though it's not really lost, we never, it's not like we just found it. It's that we recorded it early, and now you get a chance to not only hear it, but also to watch it. And we do really encourage that you join us on our Patreon page. That's where a lot of this is going to be available, both audio and video. Just joining us, you can do it for as little as $1 a month. There's a few different tiers, but if you want to be able to watch the videos and such, it's $10 a month. And you can even wait until August when we come out. And we are planning 20 episodes for the second season. And I believe that we're going to go straight through, maybe with 1 week off in the middle. I'm not sure. I have to go back and look at the calendar. I guess I should have had that in front of me. But it's definitely worth doing that and supporting what I hope is great radio, great topics with great guests, and I guess a little bit of me in there as well. So Carlos Pedraza, right here on Alpha Waves Radio. But yeah, I wanted to. So Carlos, I really wanted to talk to you about this. I mean, it's just so that, and in case people don't really understand what's happening, is that you run a website called Axamonitor, and
Right.
this website is, and you could probably explain this better than me, but you're basically monitoring the efforts of this old Star Trek fan film called Axanar, and you could probably explain that way better than me.
Sure. So how it works is this project started out as a 20-minute long teaser. It was always meant to be a feature film, and as a proof of concept, they produced this teaser back in 2014 called Prelude to Axanar, about 22 minutes long. It's excellent. I like it. The guy who directed it, Crispin Gossett, is a fantastic director. He's gone on. He's working on I think it's a CW show right now.
Oh wow! Wow, that's great.
He's worked for for Weta in New Zealand. He's a super talented guy, artist, director, writer. And based on the success of that first trailer, 20-minute trailer called Prelude to Axanar, which was made as sort of a History Channel style documentary about the the 4 Years War with the Klingons against the Federation, it really was a way to tease people into handing over a lot of money to make the feature film.
Yeah.
And they did. They raised $1.2 million to make it. The budget for it was actually around $1.9 million, which they never actually got to because of a pesky little copyright infringement lawsuit that came about from CBS and Paramount, who were a little irked that money was being made off of businesses were being established off of their intellectual property. So that was about a 13-month long lawsuit.
And by the way, we're talking about businesses like they were doing like coffee and model kits and all kinds of different things, as if they were licensing out this weird Star Trek thing that they created. But
yeah, they had merch. They had they were building a commercial studio to make the film, which was fine as far as it went. Except they were also going to use it to make other films and to rent it out as a facility for commercial films to be used.
Yeah, to make money.
Very, very big plans for how it worked. They all fell through, of course, but in the course of all of that, $1.7 million was spent, almost $2 million, and near about $750,000 alone spent on just building out this studio and renting the facility and installing a green screen and all this other stuff, and not a single frame of this feature film was ever made inside of that studio. They shot a short little teaser thing, one scene outside of the parking lot, but you could have shot that anywhere in a parking lot. So, $750,000 of fans' money that was supposed to be going to shoot this film, nothing of it was ever made inside the studio that they paid for. So they had to abandon the studio because obviously they ran out of money, and so they managed to convince enough, like about 300 fans, to pay for their move over to Atlanta, which is where Axanar lives today, promising that under the terms of the settlement with CBS, they can produce 2 15-minute fan films that approximate what they were trying to do with a feature film, and they decided to do that in the style of the documentary that they did with Prelude to Axanar. And that actually ended up turning away a large number of people who wanted to, CBS told them, look, you can make 30 minutes. And they wanted to make 30 minutes of the first 30 minutes of the feature film, because everything was ready. It was written, they had actors, they had sets, they had costumes, they had all this stuff ready to go. And Alec Peters, who is the producer, the guy who oversees all of this, instead wanted to replicate, rest on his laurels and do the same thing they had done with Prelude. And everyone left. The writer left, Bill Hunt, the director and editor, Robert Meyer Burnett, left. There was a whole bunch of the head creative people who just left because they disagreed fundamentally with spending resources that way. So I've been covering this story since I started the website in February of 2016. So now we're on 3 years, which I never expected it to last that long, and I would love for it to end. But the problem is that Alec Peters is still going after people's money, and he has to raise, by his own accounts, around $200,000 to make these two 15-minute films, which is pretty expensive for a fan film. $200,000 for 30 minutes, and he is prevented from doing so on a public crowdfunding platform like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. He can only raise that money privately. But what he's been doing in the 2.5 years since this lawsuit was settled has been setting up a means for which, getting people to sign up for his email list and his website and his YouTube channel and Twitter and whatever, to get people's direct contact information so he can make an appeal to them for money to make, for the $200,000 budget for these two short films. And, my whole thing at this point is that I just want people to be fully informed about who this is, how the history of this project, their, real mismanagement of fans' money up to date. And if they still want to hand money over to him, that's up to them. But I feel like my job is to make sure that this doesn't happen in a vacuum, that it doesn't happen in the dark, that people are fully aware of the history of this project, the history of this guy, and make their judgments accordingly.
And one thing that I think a lot of people should understand is that also I've been caught up in a lot of this too, so I'm not like just some observer. I know. I'm not just some observer that's kind of like, oh, Carlos, tell me about this Axanar thing that I don't know about. But it's because I ran 1701 News during during the entire lawsuit aspect of it with CBS, a copyright infringement lawsuit, and it was a. Let's just say that Alec Peters is a very litigious person, or at least wants to be a very litigious person.
Oh, he is a litigious person.
Yeah, not very successfully. Yeah,
not successfully, but
but that was a lot of the bullshit that really kind of happened in terms of even some of the stuff that put pressure on 1701 News. It wasn't on my side, but I had partners, so that made a little bit of a difference. Who I don't think were as comfortable or used to having people threaten them with lawsuits. In the news business, you've been in the news business for a long time. I've been in the news business for a long time. Being threatened with lawsuits is like what we deal with every week.
Yeah.
And it's how we deal with libel and all of those things that we have to deal with every single story that we publish makes us very aware of every single word, and why it's so important to make sure that not just for a libel standpoint, but because our whole credibility, our whole integrity goes into every word.
Of accuracy,
yeah.
Sure. And if you make an error, you correct the error.
Yeah.
And that's like basic stuff, so that it's clear that you're not making these errors intentionally, you're not trying to lie
or cover them up when we make them. Yeah,
exactly. Accuracy and credibility are your stock in trade, and so it's just super important that not just for your own credibility, but just the fact that you can harm other people's lives by printing stuff that's wrong. And it's a big responsibility. And
this is something that I know that you're very mindful of. There are a lot of people who are angry, especially people who have been waiting for Axanar, for something to be produced, where all of this money went into. Where a lot of people gave their money, their hard-earned money, that they were hoping to see a movie of some sort come out of it, or some type of Star Trek project that had that fan passion fueling it, and they're not getting that. And of course, Alec Peters isn't the most personable person either, so that hasn't really helped anything either. So there's a lot of anger, but you've probably been one of the calmest people. I think that Alec Peters likes to refer to those who don't, who are against, or at least who are questioning him, as haters. But if you're a hater, you must be the nicest hater there ever has been. And you've also been very fair, whether it's been in social media, whether it's been on Axamonitor. But but I know that you've been covering not only what Alec Peters is doing in terms of fan film stuff, but also other fan-related issues, including a company that seems to like die and come back called PropWorks, which where Alec Peters, he used to or at least he still does, I guess, in some form or another. He helps auction set pieces or props or costumes, things that you would see on television shows. I think he was involved with the Stargate when they when they were selling off Battlestar Galactica, and some of those things. And and I guess that there's been some coverage lately because Gary Hutzel, who was he was a production designer, right?
No, he was a visual effects artist.
Visual effects artist, yeah.
And I think he won 4 Emmys.
And and it's sad. He actually was one of the people who gave us tours of the Caprica set when I was in Vancouver, and he was amazing, man. He was just so sweet, very nice, and he passed away a few years ago. Or a couple of years ago,
2016, I think.
About 2016. And so his widow, of course, has some of these models that, including an original Enterprise that they used in the Deep Space Nine episode of Trials and Tribulations, and also the space station that was also a recreation of the Trouble with Tribble space station. And these are beautiful. Like, I was seeing pictures of this on social media. They're beautiful.
They're in fantastic shape.
Yeah.
Fantastic shape.
And I mean,
the photos that I received, and probably they're the same ones that you've seen, were taken in, I think, early 2017, and the K7 space station and the original USS Enterprise. I mean, it was rebuilt for Deep Space Nine, but all to the specs of the model of the original Enterprise were gorgeous. The Enterprise, I think, was 6 feet long, the shooting model, and the K7, I think, was 7. I'm not as sure about that one, but the Enterprise, I know, was 6 feet long, and it's absolutely beautiful.
And this is stuff we'll never see again because they don't even shoot visual effects like this anymore, right? I mean, I'm assuming everything's CGI now.
Pretty much, although, we're kind of seeing a CGI backlash, so you're seeing a lot more physical models used and then with CGI enhancements. So that you get a kind of a sense of groundedness and not just, CGI still lives a lot in that uncanny valley of you can kind of tell it's not real, except it looks hyper real at the same time. And
it's kind of like watching a Madonna video of today, like where she looks pretty young, but there's some CGI going on in there. But
well, we should all get such a
CGI. I could use some. I could certainly use some as well. But so that's really so. I mean, and of course, there's a question that's coming up that where I guess even though that the widow of Gary Hutzel has not been that involved in this, from what I understand, that she's kind of doesn't want to be involved in this, but there's some question about whether she received all the money that was owed to her, and this was something that you've at least been reporting. You're not saying that he owes her money. You're not saying that there's this, that he's done anything wrong, but you're reporting on what different people who are involved in this transaction in some way or another, whether tangentially or whatnot, that you're just simply reporting on that. And of course that has generated its own backlash towards you. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where we're getting at. That was like the whole long way of getting to where we're trying to head to, but
well, I'll start at the most salient part, which is that I was served with a cease and desist letter from an attorney in Nevada, even though I don't live in Nevada and Alec Peters doesn't live in Nevada, and nothing that happened around this happened in Nevada, but that's where he happens to have a lawyer who's working for him on another unrelated lawsuit that also has to deal with an Enterprise E, an Enterprise model, the Enterprise E from First Contact. But so he just basically called up that existing, that attorney with whom he has an existing relationship and said, just could you send a letter to this guy and tell him to shut up and stop lying about me? So I got this letter on Friday morning, I think, basically saying, stop lying about my client, stop it now. All of the lies, all of them. All of your lies. Stop.
Very generically, very like generically. No specifics, no.
And the thing is, you've gotten cease and desist letters.
Oh yeah.
As a reporter and as an editor, and and I've seen a lot of them myself. This is the first one I've actually received myself, but I've seen a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And the thing they all have in common, the most effective ones anyway, is they're very specific about here's the thing we're objecting to.
Yeah.
Here's the reason why. Here's where you can find it, and here's precisely what we would like to have you stop doing, take down, retract, whatever. The letter I received said none of those things. All it said generically, in all caps, by the way, was you are here. I'm reading here on my screen. So you are hereby directed to immediately cease and desist all false statements concerning Alec Peters Yeah, like immediately, like within 10 days. I have 10 days in which to remove everything. And it never goes on to say which, like it doesn't even refer specifically to this article about Gary Hetzel's wife, even though I know that's what
prompted
sparked this. Yeah, because
Alec Peters said that. He said that if you write about this, he's going to sue you.
He said directly to me, if you publish this article, I guarantee I will sue you.
And of course, when you hear that, of course, as a reporter, when you hear that, it's like, if you threaten me with a lawsuit, I'm absolutely going to publish this article.
Pretty much. I mean, if he really did not want this article published, there were a couple of very effective ways that he could have stopped me. Threatening me with a lawsuit was probably the least effective of his options. And the more effective way would have been simply to answer the questions that I gave him an opportunity to comment upon with regard to this story. I've actually been working on this story for almost 9 months. So, this didn't just fall into my lap and I just rushed to print with this. I first heard about this about 9 months ago and started working on it. And it was very hard to get people on the record at the time.
I bet, yeah.
Part of it is because Alec Peters is a very litigious guy, and he threatens and bullies people, and we've seen that repeatedly. He tried suing the former director of Axanar, Robert Meyer Burnett, in Georgia, where of course Rob Burnett has no business at all.
He has no connection to Georgia, but yeah.
But Alec Peters happens to live there, so it was convenient. And as soon as Rob Burnett hired a lawyer in Georgia to respond to the lawsuit, Alec Peters had the lawsuit dismissed. He completely backed off because he just expected that the threat alone was enough to bully Rob Burnett into doing what he wanted him to do. So, and in my reporting, I have talked to people again and again who basically they don't want to be involved in a lawsuit with Alec Peters. He's very aggressive. He makes a lot of threats to people, and they just don't want that. Most people like things to stay private, and
of course.
And many are often willing to let money he owes them go by the wayside because they don't want.
And especially if you're like somebody like Mrs. Hutzel, who probably has never, even though her husband has been somewhat in the public eye. I mean, when you're in the background, when you're on the crew, you don't really get as much publicity. I mean, today's day and age you do because of the internet and such, but definitely back during the Next Generation days and the Deep Space Nine days, you really didn't see those people that much. And then of course the wives you rarely ever see. In terms of you didn't even know they were married half the time. That's how far in the background they are, and of course she wouldn't want to be involved in this. I mean, I wouldn't really want to be involved in it, and I pretty much lived my whole life publicly. And and it just seems like it's a lot of mudslinging, it's a lot of toxicity, it's those kind of things. But but what really bugs me about this, and when I first saw this cease and desist letter, and and of course, just like you, the very first thing I noticed was that it's so generic. That that journalists, and I think that there's this idea that reporters and that news outlets and everything else, that somehow that if somebody doesn't talk to us, or if somebody doesn't, that we have to maintain 50-50 balance no matter what, and if we can't achieve that because you refuse to talk to us and we can't publish, or some weird crazy things like that. But that's actually not true. I mean, what we're obligated to do is to provide the opportunity for fairness, to give you an opportunity to speak. And if you choose not to speak, maybe it might kill the story because maybe there's not enough without that. There's not enough there. But a lot of times there is, and it's going to come off a little, imbalance, but that's not our fault. We gave you every opportunity to respond. And to send a letter like this, even if you did have something that was incorrect, I mean, there's an obligation for them to mitigate that. There's an obligation for Alec Peters to contact you to say, I'm sorry, Carlos, but what you just printed is incorrect. I want you to print a correction or retract it or whatnot. And then you will take what he says, you're going to look at it, you'll investigate it, and if you come back and realize, oh, you know what, that is an incorrect, then you'll print a correction, or if it's really that bad, you'll print a retraction if you really made a big mistake somewhere, and that might not have.
Yeah, I have made mistakes.
Yeah, and you correct them.
I correct them immediately.
Yeah.
I even put a big banner saying correction.
Yeah.
Because it's that important.
Of course, and that's part of what, it's like somebody, like, I work in newspaper, and some people think that, oh, it's so embarrassing when you have to print a correction. It's like, no, not at all. In fact, I expect to print 1 or 2 corrections a month. If I'm not printing 1 or 2 corrections a month, then I feel like, maybe, I need to make sure that we're really listening to make sure that we're getting everything right. Because, we're human beings, and we have to deal with a lot of information, and it's very easy to sometimes, make a mistake or misunderstand something, or maybe we jump to a minor assumption or something that we shouldn't have, but it's usually really minor. But to come in and say, like, oh, everything's a lie, you can't do that. Even if a judge were to look at, that letter and say, hey, you were put on notice, you weren't put on notice. There's nothing in there that puts you on notice. Right. It's just basically saying everything coming out of your mouth is a lie, which in the law, there's no such thing as an absolute like that. You can't, that's so hyperbolic that it has no force of law to begin with, but it really has nothing that would help him in court if this ever made it to a court at all.
Exactly. It's troublesome on a lot of fronts. But the most troublesome front on which he has problems with this is simply the facts.
Yeah.
Because everything I printed about this story is backed with evidence, with documents. There are some gaps that are missing, and let me just run through the facts because they're pretty quick.
Yeah.
Gary Hutzel's wife, has owns these models and props and things from Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica and all the shows he worked on, and with his sudden and unexpected death, like many people, she needed money, and so she, set about figuring out what he owned, what she owned, what they owned together, and what could be sold in order to, help her and their kids. And in the course of discovering what that was, she ended up working with Alec Peters, making contact with him. She agreed to consign this property to him for him to sell to, collectors or museums or whoever would want it. In the case of this enterprise model, he had a potential buyer right away. And we know who that buyer is. Someone he's suing, actually, on another case, the one I mentioned with the Enterprise E. But Hero Prop, which is a prop company based in Las Vegas, near Las Vegas. And they bought the model for $235,000. Now, under a standard consignment agreement in the props industry, it's an 80-20 split. The owner, in this case Mrs. Hutzel, is due 80% of that $235,000, which is, I think, $188,000. And PropWorks, Alec Peters, as the company that brokered this sale, was due 20%. So that's fairly straightforward. Trouble is, he only paid her, and again, this is according to her, he paid her $100,000. And between the other money that he never paid out of that $235,000, and we have that number. I published the photos of the certified checks, the cashier's checks that added up to $25,000. I published the agreement, the purchase agreement for $235,000. So this is all documented. And then I published emails from Mrs. Hutzel saying I was never paid more than $100,000. She didn't even know how much it went for. She only knows that she was paid $100,000. So she didn't discover this until November of last year, and the sale was made in 2017. So, so it was a long time. And in the meantime, she also owned one of the Orbs of the Prophets from Deep Space Nine, and that was sold as well for $8,000. So she was due 80% of that, which is like $6,400, I think. So altogether, the amount that she's owed comes to about $94,400 that she's never seen. And as far as we know, because she mysteriously broke contact with anyone and everyone around this issue in November 2018. And so we don't know, maybe he did pay her between then and now. And so that was one of the questions I posed to Alec Peters. Have you made any additional payments to her since that time? And like I said, I sent him 10 questions, the last of which was, is there any other context around this story you think I should know before I go to press with this? And he flat refused to answer any of these, and then followed it up immediately with another email saying, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. So that's where he left things off. But I definitely gave him the opportunity to explain. If he had said, look, I've paid her since this, and there's no way for me to confirm that because I can't get her to talk to me right now. But I would have had to have stopped the story dead in its tracks at that point, because unless I know that unless I can show that he didn't pay her, the story hasn't gone anywhere. Because if it did happen, then it's not a story.
Well, I mean, but you could have had a story, especially if people were talking about it. I mean, this is one of those things
Sure.
I have with my, that if you had a story where people were talking about it, making these claims, that that you would have kind of a journalistic opportunity or obligation at least to kind of set the record straight. So if people believe that he hadn't paid, but if he came and said, no, I did pay, even if you couldn't prove it, you would still at least have to put that out there. I mean, you'd have to say, he's claiming, he's stating that he did pay, and he wouldn't provide us evidence of it, but we have nothing to say otherwise.
Right. Well, I mean, in all fairness, I probably would have at least
it's a judgment call. Yeah, it's
a little
call.
while longer before I went to press, just because, he's not especially forthcoming with me, but I would probably try, based on his statement that he had, to try to confirm that before I went to press with it.
Of course.
But he didn't take that opportunity. He basically said, I'm not going to tell you anything other than if you publish this, I will sue you. So, so that's how we got to where we are. But
the biggest thing about this is that, so what the cease and desist is intended to do is it's intended to curb what at least from how I read it, what their claims, or at least that Alec Peters is claiming, is libel. And libel, because he couldn't fight that in Nevada. He maybe could have fought that in Georgia. I don't know, but you don't have a connection to Georgia, so I'm not sure how that would work. I mean, I'm assuming that the venue would have to be Washington, because you operate under the laws of Washington where you live, not Washington D.C., but Washington State. But but in Washington, at least, and like, I'm not a lawyer, but obviously somebody who works in journalism, and we have to be well aware of libel laws. We have to be very well versed on it. There's like four criteria that Alec Peters himself would have to satisfy in order to be successful in a libel lawsuit. He won't even get past step one, which is that the information is false. Because the biggest defense that you can have, the most absolute defense that you can actually have to libel, is truth. You cannot libel with the truth. So if you say that that somebody did something and they actually did it, and then you came out and you said it, it's not libel. Maybe it's invasion of privacy if it's like a private thing or something. There's no public, but it's not libel, because libel is something that's false. And then there's a bunch of other criteria after that. So let's say even if he had a way to convince a judge or a jury that it's false, then he would have to look at that you did it either with that you were neglectful in some way, that there was negligence,
that I knew it was false,
that you knew it was false, or should have known, and because that he's a semi-public figure. Because he's somebody who has done something. He's not just some private citizen that nobody heard about. He's some semi-public that at least by Washington law and pretty much every other state's law, that he would have to show that you were malicious, that you were out to get him. Right. And
which is what he believes.
Yeah.
To be honest.
But then he still has to go back to step number one. He still has to go to step number one. Like, what you're saying is false. I mean, when he would threaten me with lawsuits, especially back in the beginning part of the lawsuit, he was threatening us with lawsuits, saying that that you can't, at least 1701 News, that you can't, that basically that we can't report on this because we can't report on the lawsuits. But of course we can. In fact, I can report anything that's in the lawsuit. In fact, I have protections by pulling directly from the lawsuit. I can actually quote anything I want that's in a filed lawsuit, as long as I attribute it to the lawsuit.
Exactly.
I mean,
and the attribution is really important.
Yeah.
Because in my case, I never say myself, he did not pay her. That is not what the story is. What the story is that people who work for him at PropWorks, more than one, are saying that he did not, and that there is documentary evidence, photographic evidence, that is the case.
Yeah.
And that's all. So as long, so his problem is not with what I'm saying, it's what other people are saying, or what, this documentary evidence shows or doesn't show. And he needs to deal with that rather than saying that I'm saying that he cheated this widow.
And even then, you're not necessarily saying that that he's done something wrong or something outside of his agreement with her, because we don't really know what that agreement is.
Exactly.
We don't know what other expenses that they had agreed that he would, that she would absorb and that he would collect, for whatever reasons. But but the fact is that at least based on this, the primary agreement, or at least the primary whatever that was the 80-20 split and such that that exists, is that from all that we understand, all that we can be able to show is that she received this amount of money, which was less than what anybody would expect for that kind of. And there is and of course there is a public need to know in a sense that because anybody who's going into that, because the thing is that I don't know, if I ever owned something very valuable, I would be just so cautious about consigning it or having somebody work. I know that's the way you pretty much auction things, and if I auctioned it on my own, I wouldn't get anywhere near what an auction house would do, or some kind of a auction company. But at the same time, it's, if you don't know that business, it's really tough to keep an eye on it, especially if you're not even paying attention to the part when it got sold and how much it got sold for, until a year later. It's that it's really easy that some things can get missed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an industry, and I don't know the props industry that well, and frankly don't really want to. My own bias, because of my general ignorance around that industry, kept me from pursuing this story in the early months as doggedly as some people might have wanted me to. But as soon as more and more information came to light that basically, this is an important part of Star Trek history, that and about a person who's an important part of Star Trek history himself, Gary Hutzel, that people have an investment in knowing what happened to it. And the props industry is one that depends on credibility and transparency. And so people need to know, because all these things are being sold at public auctions, they need to have confidence that the manner in which they're being sold, the manner in which they're, things are being valuated and shipped to them and everything, that all of that is on the up and up. And we see some serious questions being raised around that in terms of how Alec Peters handled not just this particular sale, but conducted other auctions in the past with other people's property. And you mentioned earlier at the beginning that this is another incarnation of PropWorks. The first incarnation went bankrupt, I think, in 2014 or 2015, and left MGM, which owns Stargate, holding the bag for about it was a few $100,000 worth of props and things and models that they owned and had consigned to PropWorks, and just gone. They were just, it was entered into a bankruptcy as one of the costs he was trying to get out of, and he did. He got PropWorks went bankrupt, and all of those debts were canceled under bankruptcy laws. So it is important for people to be aware of that background, that history. PropWorks was started up again, incorporated in a different state, and that's the version of PropWorks that exists today. It was co-located at the same property as Axanar in California, even though there's no record, according to court records, that PropWorks ever paid any rent for that facility, storage, office space, anything like that. So if they never did, that means that Star Trek fans who were expecting their money to go to pay for a feature film to be made for them were also bankrolling a significant part of the expenses for an unrelated third-party company that happened to be owned by the same guy. So people deserve to know this. It's business that's being conducted publicly, that depends upon an important significant level of public trust, and as such, I think merits this kind of examination also in the public. in the public interest.
And I think it's really important because I mean back in the original Star Trek days, obviously, and for many years and decades after that, when a show went off the air, no matter how popular it was, they struck the set. And when they struck the set, I mean, it was like. Gone. Yeah, it was gone. It was out. I mean, the Star Trek set was a little bit different for some reason because part of it went to UCLA, and then it's kind of rotted there, and then only certain pieces were left from that. But now, like when in this day and age, like where there's so much fan interest and so many ways of being able to keep pieces of those things. And I remember because, and I guess it was PropWorks that did Battlestar Galactica, and I didn't even know what PropWorks was back then. I was just familiar as just some other prop company. Somebody that I had worked with online quite a bit was working for PropWorks. He's like one of the early employees of it. And it was kind of funny because he was busy cataloging all of the stuff from Battlestar Galactica, from the sets and everything, and on the Vipers they used to have like the name, like they put their names, the
nameplates,
the nameplates on the side, and of course those are just like, I mean those are just for television purposes, it's just like kind of like cellophane that they would just put on there, it's like kind of a sticker. They had actually done a special one when we did the very first Sci-Fi Channel digital press tour. I think it was like 04, 03, I can't remember what year it was.
Can you believe it's been that long?
I know. It makes me feel like super old. But I remember that very first digital press tour, we went to Vancouver, and several online outlets, including, which was Sci-Fi Portal at the time, but then when it became Airlock Alpha, we all went to visit sets, and Battlestar Galactica was one of them. And I still have a picture of me wearing glasses and everything, where I'm standing next to a Viper, and they actually had like Sci-Fi Press Tour or something on it, and it was like that was like the nameplate that was on the side. They just did it for that promotional thing. Well, this person, I guess I could say Joe Bodwin, he came across it while he was cataloging it, and of course that's not worth anything, so he's like, hey, I'll send this to you, and he did. He actually, and I have it somewhere. I don't know where it is now. I'm sure my dad maybe has, I don't know, but it was like the coolest thing for him to send that piece to me. That was like my one kind of thing to do that. And and for people like me, and I think a lot of fans, is that or being able to touch a piece of something from the shows, being able to walk somewhere where the shows were, like when I, being in New York City, that even though we don't really film science fiction shows here, but it's kind of cool. There's a new show on Showtime called City on the Hill with Kevin Bacon, and it's supposed to be in Boston, but let's just say a lot of it was shot in New York City and in Yonkers. And including, I'm not sure because I'm only up to the first episode, I haven't got past it yet, but there's going to be a scene, or there already has been a scene, where Kevin Bacon's character is in this old kind of Irish-like bar, and it's actually literally 3 doors down from my newspaper office, in the Bronx. And so he was actually, so we actually have a picture, we published a picture of Kevin Bacon coming out of this place, and and it's just it's the coolest stuff that you see that. And it's just, now when I walk by, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. This is like where just those little things I nerd out a little bit sometimes, but but there's a lot of people like that, and to have that chance to have a connection like that, that's why these auction companies are so amazing to have. And of course, none of us are buying the Enterprise E unless we have a ton of money. None of us are buying that beautiful Enterprise model, but there are smaller pieces that we can to have. But in order to convince these studios and these networks to take the time and expense and everything else that it takes to catalog everything and auction each one of these individual pieces off, you got to have companies like PropWorks doing this. And if you can't trust them to do it, then it's just never going to happen. And that's what really bugs me about that whole thing, is that I don't want any company to come in and ruin that for everybody.
Sure. Well, and the inner workings of the props industry is, I mean, it's built on people's affection for and nostalgia for, television shows and films that they really care about. And little things can make a huge difference in how valuable any particular thing is. Did it actually appear on screen is like the biggest deal. And you have to be able to match that prop with what you see on a particular episode or something to
authenticate it. To authenticate it.
Exactly. And so, so that takes time to do too. You have to be able to say, as seen in episode blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And, so people need to be assured if they're going to end up spending money, like a lot more money for something that was that was screen used, as opposed to things that may be constructed for the show but never appeared. Or you can't find them on screen.
Or it's like an earlier version of something that they were building.
Earlier versions, or they make multiple copies of things like costumes and patches and things like that, so that they're ready should they need them. And there's a lot of that other stuff that never appeared on screen that still has value, but if it had appeared on screen, that value increases exponentially. So that's why trust and credibility is such an important part of that industry, and that's why I think in this case it's not just disturbing that this widow of a very important artist, visual effects artist, may have been cheated, but the fact that it infects the entire rest of that industry, and that it's coming from an individual who in this area of fan filmmaking has already raised so much money and mismanaged it, and is going back to the well for even more without anything to convince us that he's in any better position to manage any more money than the 1.7 million he mismanaged in the first place. So
what really upsets me about this whole, it's funny because before the CBS lawsuit, even though I guess I did have some dealings with Alec Peters over the Galileo shuttlecraft, which I totally had even forgotten.
That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, and I totally forgot that was even him until, I think he reminded me of it. I just remember just some dick that I had talked to, and just, and I basically told Doug Drexler and others, stay away from him, and he's like, yeah, we already are, kind of thing. But to be honest, Alec, even when my website was covering Axanar before the lawsuit, I had a writer who was writing about them pretty positively, actually. I didn't know who. I remember Alec Peters' name was in there, but I didn't know who it was. It just didn't connect. And now it just seems like for the last 3 years that's been maybe almost 4 years that this has been the 5 years. Man.
Since 2014.
Oh, that we've been dealing with this, and and the thing is that Alec Peters has the ability to really fire up fans in a way that will get them to donate money. Impressive. He can get actors to come in and be a part of things. He can get people who you would think would never sell their morals in a way, David Gerald, for instance. I know you're good friends with, so I know I shouldn't pick on him, but he was somebody I really respected, even though he's kind of dickish, but I always respected that aspect of him, because he's dickish in a way that that I thought was positive. But it's just that where it just makes me question that, and it's just that he's such a negative personality in the end, where that if you're not totally 100% with him, and if you're not handing over your ideas for them to be his ideas, he doesn't want you to be around. He wants to control things. And, trust me, there's been a lot of projects that I've wanted to do. I've been trying to get a web series off the ground, a web miniseries off the ground, I think, for 6 or 7 years now. And at one point I was going to direct it, then I realized I don't know what the hell I'm doing, So I tried to bring in somebody else, but then it's just... but it's a very difficult thing, and at some point, you have to really step back from something. You have to look at what you can bring to the table. And sure, I would love to be somebody who writes fiction, who loves to write screenplays and such, but I also have to look at how effective am I really at that? How good am I at that kind of thing? And maybe I'm all right with it, but at least I can recognize it enough to be yeah, I'm not going to be winning an Oscar anytime soon for Best Original Screenplay, or maybe ever. I'd love to get maybe one thing produced in my life, and that would be awesome. But I don't think Alec Peters has that sense of awareness, that he really thinks that he's this fantastic producer, this fantastic writer, this fantastic actor. And you know what? As a fan, I'm sure he's decent as a fan, as a hobby. But anything beyond that at the professional level, which is what he's touting himself as, I just don't see it.
Yeah, and I try to stay away from any kind of actual judgment about the creative quality of his work. I really just look at the brass tacks. You raised almost $2 million, and 1.7 to be precise. most of which came from fans and from crowdfunding, but not all of it. A lot of it came from direct donations and merchandise sales and other things. And we're unable to deliver that. And now after being unable to deliver it, you're saying that you want even more money to deliver something less than you promised in the first place. And why should someone believe you? What kind of steps are you taking to reassure people that this is a good place for them to put even more of their money? I mean, there are people who, retired people or people who took part of their retirement savings, $10,000, thousands of dollars, and signed them over to Alec Peters and to Axanar, and they will never see that money back. They won't. They did it not because they were expecting money back, because of course even he understands that it wasn't a financial investment, but they wanted their names to be part of something bigger. This fan film that looked like it held real promise, and that they wanted to be able to say, this is part of my legacy to the world.
Yeah,
and that's never going to happen now.
And that's terrible. And I mean, and the fact that fans and a lot of them just wanted to see this produced. They wanted to see, because I'm not the biggest consumer of fan films. I never have been, and I know that's kind of where you really got your start and such. But one thing I'll tell you is that I absolutely love the passion that goes into them, and
sure.
And when you see the work that went into all of these different fan films, and even Prelude to Axanar, and I might not really agree with about 97% of what Robert Meyer Burnett says, maybe 98. But what I'll tell you though is that man is super passionate about what he does. He's super passionate about Star Trek.
Editor,
and he loves Star Trek, and he loves everything about it. And if you don't believe that, just go watch Free Enterprise, and you can see that Free Enterprise is somebody, him and name slipping me, who worked with him on that movie. But the two of them together, those are two people who loved Star Trek. And Free Enterprise is a Valentine to Star Trek. It's not just Valentine. It's like it's like a really dirty sex very explicit. I mean, they love it, and it really bugs me to where you can have somebody who can alienate so many people in this, and just about everybody who's come and touched Axanar and has walked away, almost to the point where they're even questioning. I hope they're not questioning their love for Star Trek, but you kind of wonder that sometimes. Like, hey, I really brought everything I could to the table, my love and my passion. I exposed all of that to somebody, only to have to have it ripped apart and destroyed. That's really easy then to really say, why am I doing this? Why am I even involved in doing this stuff? Why am I even a fan of this? This is the way I'm going to be treated with it.
Well, and I think that's part of what I think motivates me in continuing to cover this story, is that I feel like people need to know that there are people to whom this is still important, who are willing to invest their time and their care to hold people accountable for what they're doing. And that's really what's at the heart of this, is an utter lack of accountability. And and you see it again and again and again, where it's never his fault, it's always somebody else's fault. And if only it's CBS's fault that I wasn't able to make Axanar. And the thing was, you were warned by CBS months before you were.
Yeah, months before, yeah.
And he will swear to you up and down that he never got any kind of warning from them. And it's just simply not true. It's simply not true. But,
there's too much evidence it's conclusive evidence. It's not even like circumstantial. It's direct, including coverage at the time where, back in that day where you even have a trade publication saying that happened. Yeah. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, but if you ask him or any of his supporters, what they'll say is, well, it doesn't identify the specific spokesperson for CBS, and therefore it's not real. I'm like, it's an industry publication.
Yeah.
And it's standard for just a spokesperson to say a thing.
And there's no record that even Axanar reached out to that public. Was it? I think it was Deadline or somebody, or
it was the Wrap.
Or the Wrap. Yeah, he didn't reach out to the Wrap and say like, "Hey, that's incorrect." And even if they didn't correct it, at least you could sit. When the New York Times 10 years ago, by the way, when the New York Times first announced the Sci-Fi name, the new Sci-Fi name for the Sci-Fi Channel, and part of that coverage stated stated that NBC Universal developed the name internally, I actually submitted a correction request because that's obviously not true.
Right.
They never did it, because they probably, who cares about me? That's all right.
But at least there's a record.
But at least there's a record of it. I still have the email, actually. I can show people, I submitted a correction request, for that. And so then if there was ever a lawsuit, there never was, and never would be, but let's say that there was a lawsuit, and somebody said, well, they said it there, and you never they never corrected it. It's like, yeah, but I submitted the very next day, I submitted a correction request. Whether they acknowledge it or not, that's totally up to them, but I still did it. So, you can't say that I was waiving that information.
That's an important point because there are a lot of states, and by the way, Georgia, where he lives, is one of them, that requires anyone who's going to sue someone for libel or defamation to ask for a retraction or a correction first before they can even proceed with any litigation. And this cease and desist does not qualify for that. It just says stop. It doesn't say fix it or get or correct it or investigate or anything like that. Take it back. It just says take it down.
Yeah.
And there's a big legal difference between those two concepts. And because one is about correcting things for the record, and the other is an actual attack on the First Amendment. And thankfully we still live in a country where that holds some meaning.
At least for now, yeah.
At least for now, for as long as we can.
Until we get that state-run media, but who knows?
And the reality is that I gave him every opportunity to correct what I was going to publish, and he just refused to do it, and instead just struck back this way. So,
what is your next step on that, by the way?
For the record,
what is your next step on that? You got to cease and desist. I think that at least by the time this airs, right now, and probably by the time this airs, you're probably still within that 10 days to respond or to remove all the lies. I'm assuming you're not taking anything down. What's your, can you say what's the next step on that? What's happening with the cease and desist?
Sure. Yeah. No, I can tell you what I'm working on right now. So right now I'm going to quote from the letter real quick because it's only about a page long, a little over a page.
That's fine. That's fine.
It says, accordingly, we demand that you, 1, immediately cease and desist making any and all false statements concerning Alec Peters, and 2, provide our firm with written assurances within 10 days of the date of this letter, so it would be July 20th, that you have removed such statements from the internet and will cease and desist from making further false statements concerning Alec Peters. In the event you fail to respond to this cease and desist demand letter, Alec Peters has requested that this firm pursue all available legal remedies on his behalf, including but not limited to seeking monetary damages, injunctive relief, and in order that you pay his court costs and attorney's fees. Your liability and exposure under such legal action could be considerable. You're encouraged to consult with an attorney regarding this matter, et cetera, et cetera. Contact me directly if you do get an attorney, basically, is what he ends up saying. So that's what the demand actually is.
Okay.
And, first of all, on its face, this cease and desist letter has, because it lacks any specificity, just is really flimsy. But, I think it's prudent to get some legal counsel in the matter. And so I have been talking to various First Amendment people, First Amendment lawyers, First Amendment experts about it. I've sent them a copy of the letter. Everyone who has seen a copy of the letter, who is an expert in these issues, has laughed out loud upon reading it.
I laughed out loud too.
I
don't know if you count me in those experts, but I laughed out loud too, just FYI.
I had a broad smile on my face as I was reading it, just because it was like, this says so much without really saying anything. So I have been talking to an attorney and to other experts, and formulating sort of what the best way to respond to it is. And I'll tell you that they're from some pretty good law firms, bigger than the one he's talking to.
In the correct state, I'm assuming, too.
Well, the thing about the state, the venue is it's not as clear cut as you'd imagine, because it's
not Nevada, though. It can't be Nevada.
Well, exactly. It can't be Nevada,
it could be either Washington or Georgia, I guess, but.
Well, it makes more sense in Washington or Georgia, but. In fact, I've had one legal person suggest to me that this lawyer in Nevada, even writing such a letter to me, while it may not be illegal, it is unethical since he's not licensed to practice law in Washington State, which is where I live and where this was sent. So for him to be making legal threats like this and to say my firm will be pursuing you when his firm, and I checked, because I do these kinds of things, I checked this lawyer's and his two partners states where they're licensed to practice law, and none of the three of them is licensed to practice law in Washington State.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think Georgia either.
And that has to be a bar issue of some sort, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like...
So I mean, it's at least an ethical issue. I don't think it rises to one of actual illegality, but it's not ethical for, the ethical thing would have been to say, you know what, if you're you need this letter to come from an attorney in the state where you're planning on pursuing this matter.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so it's interesting that you bring up the topic of venue, because it's not as straightforward as you might imagine. Because I went into this last week also assuming that if he was going to sue me, it would have to happen in Washington State because that's where I reside. But it turns out that because it is an internet-based complaint, that what I published appeared on the internet, and that the internet is everywhere, that potentially he can pursue me in different, or not multiple, but different venues. But there has to be a rationale behind it.
Yeah, so there has to be some connection at least. There has to be something that either connects him to it or connects you to it. So that's why
that connects the information to it.
Yeah.
So, for example, if what I was writing was targeted at people in a specific geography, like let's say it was just people in California, then conceivably he could sue me in California because the people who'd been harmed by the information, the ostensibly libelous information that I'm publishing, were in California, and that's where his reputation was hurt. But that cuts both ways, because the fact that it goes out everywhere on the internet means that that there isn't a specific group of people that you can point to and say, he targeted them and that's the source of the damage. That's the other thing he's going to have to show, is like how he was damaged by what I
yeah.
And he's on the record talking about how irrelevant my what I write is and everything. It's like, on the one hand, you keep saying publicly that what I say isn't important and no one pays attention, yet on the other hand, you're saying you're suing me because people are paying attention and I'm sufficiently important for them to pay attention. So kind of can't have it both ways. So anyway, it could end up being somewhere else, but he would have to make a convincing argument to a court as to why it should be in one place versus the other. Now, the other thing that he has to overcome is the fact that most states now have what's called an anti-SLAPP law, and SLAPP is SLAPP. It stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation.
Oh, I thought this was like Zsa Zsa Gabor couldn't slap any cops or something. But anybody old enough for that joke? I don't know. Probably not.
Well, you and I are, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, we're old.
We are old. So the purpose of these laws were because large corporations were going after people who were saying things they didn't like, that may very well be perfectly within the First Amendment rights, but because they're a big corporation and these people are not, they would use lawsuits as a way to silence them, because when you have a lawsuit filed against you, it costs money even just to respond.
Yeah.
Which is money most people don't have.
Exactly.
I certainly don't have it. And so the idea is not that you're trying to prove that someone like me is wrong, but that you just want me to shut up. And the problem with that, of course, is we have a First Amendment that says I have the right to say things, as long as they're not libelous, obviously.
Yeah.
And so these laws are intended to strike down quickly lawsuits like this one, whose intent is not actually to prevent law or to.
Well, if there's a lawsuit filed, let's make it clear: there's no lawsuit filed against you.
There isn't a lawsuit yet, but any lawsuit that was filed would have to overcome. Because, again, most states have this, including Washington State, although it's not as strong as I wish it were.
Yeah.
But, that provides for a very quick way, like within 30 days, for this issue to come before a judge and for a judge to make a decision quickly saying this is a meritless lawsuit, and I'm stopping it in its tracks because it's clear to me, as a judge, that what you're trying to do is not prove that there was libel, but to just shut up a critic, and you're not allowed to do that in this country.
Yeah.
And by the way, Alec Peters has lost this kind of lawsuit before. He has traveled this territory before in the props world, surprisingly, when he sued a guy named Jason DeBoard in California for a series of critical blog posts about how Alec Peters does and doesn't do business in the props world. And Alec Peters' response to that was this lawsuit. And it was thrown out, and of course, because it was meritless, and a judge found that he was in fact just trying to shut up a critic, which you're not allowed to do, and awarded him Jason DeBoard $26,000 in damages and attorney's fees, and which, by the way, Alec Peters has never paid.
And that's what you have to be worried about, though, too. Like if he takes you to court, let's say that does happen. I don't see that happening. He's been a lot more, bark and really no bite at all. But you could easily win that in an anti-slap situation, and you get awarded damages right away, and you may never see that, where you be out those costs. And that wouldn't be fair for you. That's not fair for. Because people think even though that we're in the public eye, and that we do things where people notice it, that we must be wealthy in some way, or that we have like piles of money, or that these lawsuits that they don't really cost that much. And it's not like we make a trip to Judge Judy or something, and we just kind of battle it out for 15 minutes. These are things that can go on for months and months, and and it costs even in an anti-slap situation. It might be faster, but it doesn't happen as if you're on The Good Wife or something, like where suddenly you file a lawsuit, then you're in court the next day. It takes a long time, and it's very expensive. And and even with these judgments, that might be filed against them, if they're not paying, it's not really a deterrent either. So it's something they have people have to worry about.
It can be. Jason DeBoard, despite the fact that he's owed this money, and has since 2011, so for 8 years, since the lawsuit was thrown out, he decided not to go after Alec Peters because it's a lot of work, and he's gotten out of other judgments in the past because he's declared bankruptcy or whatever, and Jason was ready to just, wash his hands of it and move forward. Although, interestingly, Alec Peters' opponent in the other lawsuit that is going on in Nevada right now over the Enterprise E prop, the model, the person he's suing there, Tiana Armstrong, is actually purchased Jason DeBoard's judgment, which you can do. There's like a whole industry for this, I discovered.
Of course.
Where people can purchase the legal judgments of other people and then pursue the person, because there's a lot of ways you can pursue a person.
With those who have the means to do it, or know how to do it, or want to take the time to do it, right.
And so she has purchased it so that she's now legally empowered to collect that money, because what she did is she actually paid Jason DeBoard what he was owed,
or at least something that he could agree to, that he settled.
Yeah, something that he agreed to, and and so now that's something he owes her now, as a result of this same situation where he just wanted to shut up a critic, and luckily we have a court system that can see through efforts like that, and a legal system that can see through efforts like that, and you think he would have learned, but apparently not.
It's funny, just the world that we live in, and not just the world we live in, but that, obviously everybody has the right to seek legal redress. That is part of what makes this country great, is that we have the ability that if we can't resolve differences in some way, or if we have some dispute, that we can go to court and have a judge or even a jury decide, the fate of that or whatnot. Right. And if we want to make a little bit extra money, we could have Judge Judy do it. So, but what's interesting though is just that, especially in the world of digital journalism, which is what this is what Axamonitor is. And this is not an industry unless you're HuffPost or unless you're BuzzFeed, and even they don't have that. They have money, but not anywhere near, like a ton of money to do that. It's funny just because that we have all of these kind of basement journalists as well, that these are people who've never had formal training in journalism, who've never had actually real experience doing that, which is a little bit different for you and me. I mean, we both have considerable experience doing this outside of the digital realm. With non-digital type properties and such. But it's, I just remember back in the 90s when, like, Lucasfilm was going around and shutting down websites and such because they were saying
Paramount did the same thing.
Yeah, Paramount did the same thing. And, and it was funny, like, neither of them came to us. I think we were still too new at the time. Like, Sci-Fi Portal back then, we were still kind of new, and we were a little more broad. Like, we weren't specific Star Wars. We weren't specific Star Trek. We were kind of a little more broad.
You also weren't specifically infringing, on their copyright.
But Tribune Entertainment tried to shut us down, which a lot of people don't know that they didn't actually. They filed a cease and desist because we were covering spoilers of Earth Final Conflict, the Gene Roddenberry show that Tribune was doing. That's when we had first started cutting our teeth as a spoiler site. And but the thing was is that we were able to just knock that down just because where a lot of other sites might have caved to that, we didn't, because we knew what the rights what we had were. That we knew that there was fair use. We knew that there were certain aspects that we could utilize. There were some things we were doing wrong, and we corrected that. And actually, we talked to Tribune and said, "Hey, what would make this better?" It's like, "Well, stop, do this, and do." And so we compromised. And said, okay, well, we'll put at the bottom that we'll make it clear that you don't endorse this in any way, that kind of stuff. Which just it's just to keep them from suing us. We didn't have any money for them to fight it, for us to fight it. So, we had to do that. But it's, but I mean, a mutual friend of ours, back when he was running a really good website on the entertainment industry, where he received a cease and desist from a lawyer that basically accused him of publishing child pornography, which isn't even the case. It was so far fetched, and so the fact that he even made the accusation could be libelous, because there's just no basis for it whatsoever. It was a pure, scare tactic. It's like, oh my God, I can't be associated with that, kind of thing, just to get people to comply, which I felt was totally unethical on that lawyer's part, especially when our friend didn't do anything wrong. And it's crazy. I mean, I think the one story I've shared many times with people before is my favorite one, and I wish I could I just wish I could remember what it was that I did. My website published something about Harry Potter. Don't remember what it was, but whatever it did, it got the attention of J.K. Rowling's lawyers in England, who sent over a PDF of a cease and desist in very British. Like, I don't even have the, I tried looking for it and I can't find it. As I laughed about it so hard, because it's just so cool, just having in that British kind of, that British anger kind of thing, Yeah. And, basically telling me to cease and desist on something, or that I would feel the weight of, J.K. Rowling on me. And and I wouldn't recommend this as a response for anybody. I definitely wouldn't do it in my professional day. I might do it for my websites, because who cares? But but my response literally was, like, I sent back and said, "Dear, sir, blah blah blah, please sue me. I could never buy that publicity with any amount of money that I had. I'm sure I could get a lawyer pro bono, because he probably couldn't buy that publicity either. And, and please sue me. I know I can win, because you're trying to target me on whatever laws that are in Britain that aren't the same here. And I operate under American laws, so I know I'll win, but I would love the publicity. Please, please. Here's my number. Tell me, when you're going to sue me and where, so I can get the right lawyer, blah, blah, blah." And I never heard from them again. It was very disappointing.
A lot of lawyers and big media companies like this depend on fear as a weapon. when it comes to cease and desist orders. And I mean, and a lot of cease and desist orders are, they're fully justified. I'm not saying I don't believe in them.
Yeah.
Because they really are. There
are some real ones.
A relatively cheap way to take care of a dispute.
Yeah.
If in fact you're doing something wrong.
I've done it with copyright.
They send you a letter.
Yeah, I've done it with copyright. On my website, people pulling full stories from my website and posting them on message boards. I'd have my lawyer, I'd pay her $75. She would send a cease and desist, and it'd be gone. Mm-hmm. It's fixed.
So that's fine, and I'm totally okay with that. But you better be prepared to back it up. And if you're doing it just to intimidate people or bully people, and basically just to shut them up because you don't like what they're saying, that's a whole other thing. And that's what's going on here. Is he doesn't like what I'm saying. There's another blogger who's covering the whole Axanar controversy. It's a website called Monitoring the Trek Monitors. That it's a third-party person who's anonymous from Australia who just covers the controversy, between people who are Axanar supporters and people who are critics of it. And they have the featured blog post on their website right now is a challenge to find anything that I have written in the last 12 months. I mean, I would be willing to go on in the last 3 years, but this is what someone else is writing. In the last 12 months, that was wrong. That was like materially wrong. Yeah. That I've posted. And so far it's been
that you haven't corrected. That you haven't corrected.
That I haven't corrected, right. And so far there has been not a single challenge. Not one.
Yeah. Because there was a couple of things I think that somebody fed you wrong information about like where the Axanar studio is moving in Georgia, and they did it on purpose. And they actually admitted that they did that on purpose. They were trying to feed you false information. But the moment you realized that, because you had it verified with those people, they're just lying to you. Those what can you do? But the moment you realized that they were lying to you, you corrected it.
Right, immediately.
And that's what we're supposed to do as journalists. That's all we can do as journalists. You weren't deliberately trying to put out the wrong address. You were going by what you felt was solid information, at least solid enough to report it and attribute it. And you can't help that they were lying to you on purpose. And that's just something about them. When you have somebody that's deliberately lying to you, to me, it's just that's absolutely wrong. And I know that Axanar supporters have tried to throw that at you. It's like,
it's an old chestnut.
And it's silly. I mean, I would have people like when they would challenge me back in the day, they would sit there and they would say like, oh well, back in Star Trek Enterprise days, that you were fooled by a fake photo of T'Pol. It was supposed to be the actress cast for T'Pol, and it was a fake photo, and you fell for it. And this was like 10 years later. It's like, is that the only thing that you can bring up? I've written thousands of stories since then, and that's the only thing you can come up with? Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, I did fall for that, back in 2001.
I published an editorial immediately saying, yeah, I was wrong.
Yeah.
But the thing is that the story was not materially wrong. What I got wrong was an address.
Yeah, just an address.
They moved to one part of Atlanta
aspect,
instead of another part of Atlanta.
Yeah,
but
they still moved to Atlanta.
The actual substance of the story, which was why they had to move to Atlanta at all, and whose money they used to do that, and so forth, that changed not at all based on the address of where they moved. Now that doesn't mean that I wasn't wrong. I was wrong. I published the wrong address. There's no two ways about that. It was the wrong address. But again, corrected immediately once I
which is our responsibility, and and that you weren't, because there's not even a motive for you to print the wrong address. There's like how would that have hurt them in any way? And and the fact that they admit that they gave it to you anyway wrong, that's just people don't. I guess they just don't really understand. Even that we are going to get things wrong. I get people who I'm assuming they're.
By the way, that does fulfill the legal definition of actual malice. By the way,
what is? Oh yeah, deliberately lying. Yeah,
wrong, and they did it knowingly. And they did it specifically to hurt me.
Yeah, that's malicious and that actionable almost.
Actual malice.
Yeah, which you're too nice to. You're not going to do.
It's part and parcel of what being a reporter is about. But if you want a really great example of how actual malice is defined in the law, this is a perfect example of how it is defined. It's incorrect information that was knowingly false that you published specifically to hurt another person. to damage the reputation and credibility, which is what they tried to do.
The media, the media's always been in a position to where, like where I used to joke that, I told my dad I wanted to be a journalist, and he started to cry and say, why can't you just be a used car salesman? It'd be so much better for you. People would trust you so much more. But the thing is that, yeah, there are people out there in that call themselves journalists that, they put out bullshit. Midnight's Edge is probably a perfect example in fandom of that, where they talk about speculation and they extrapolate weird information, weird ways, and they have these sources that don't even make sense. And it's really, it makes it difficult. Over my years that when I did Airlock Alpha, and Sci-Fi Portal, the things that I really tried to do was hold other websites accountable, because I understood a lot of them did not have formal training in journalism. And my ideas were to always kind of, I had a lot of strong relationships with a lot of different websites that we were all really good friends, to the point where, when I would get targeted by like Sci-Fi or something for whatever reasons, that they would all kind of, we would all kind of join together and they would support that. But, it's because I understood that there wasn't a lot of, because it's really important that if, people always say, like, why do you care if somebody else is being unethical? Why not just worry about yourself? Or if they're doing something wrong? It's like, because I have an ethical obligation to point out unethical behavior, or to point out when something's not being done right. Because in journalism, we don't go and take a test. We don't go and get a license to be a journalist. Right, there's no, even though it's kind of, and I always say, like, I think there should be accreditation for it of some sort. Not that it would stop you from being a journalist, but like that people would, at least know kind of more who to trust and who not. But it's just that, to me, it's important because what other people do reflects on what I do. So when people go out there, every year at April 1st, I would publish a column slamming April Fool's jokes on news sites. That you cannot, I would say you cannot put fake news in the same place that you put real news. Now, if you want to do a whole different website or something, put little jokes on there and everything else, and not associate it with your news outlet, go ahead. But you cannot.
You're hardcore, Michael.
I know. And you know what? It was funny because I would get total backlash from other websites saying, oh, you're such a, you're such a party pooper. You're so old, already, and everything else. But you know what? Over those years, fewer and fewer of those sites did it. Mm-hmm. A lot of them backed up because they would see why it made a big difference. Because first of all, a lot of people in the world, which we reach out to the world, they don't know what April Fool's is. They don't, and right. Plus, a lot of people don't see those stories on April 1st. A lot of people would see stories months or weeks and stuff afterward, and see it for the first time, and they're not going to know it's an April Fool's joke. They're not going to read all the ways to the bottom, which is where most people say it's an April Fool's joke, if they say it at all.
If they say it at all.
And then you would see these stories circulate back around as being, oh, did you hear that that William Shatner is going to play Princess Leia in the next Star Wars movie, and it's like, no, that was an April Fool's joke from 2 years ago.
Yeah, they come back.
They do, and they come back all the time. But it's just, that's really important in terms of, I think, holding ourselves accountable, because really there's nobody else to hold ourselves, to hold us accountable except for our readers. But it's better for us to do it, to each other, because we actually know what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. It's like, I can't sit there and look at Alec Peters' financials. He can send me all of his financials, all of his accounting work. I'm not a forensic accountant. I wouldn't be able to tell you if there's irregularities in there. I'm not an accountant. I would send it to an accountant or a forensic accountant, or somebody to do an audit, but that's not me, and that's the same way, like, readers, they might see what we write, but they might not necessarily know, like, what you would have to do as a journalist, what I'd have to do as a journalist, the steps that it takes to get to a certain, or even the fact that you wrote a story, that you published a story, about a prop sale that where it looks like, at least to them, they might think like, oh, this just came up. You must have wrote it like 10 minutes ago, but you've been working on it for 9 months. They don't understand that there's a lot that goes into these stories. Mm-hmm. Not all of them take 9 months, but...
No, and it wasn't like I was working every day for 9 months. It just took that long to unfold.
Yeah.
And basically to get people to be willing to go on the record and hand over, copies of documents and things like that, which, can feel really dangerous for people. But, thankfully... journalism depends on people coming forward with information like that, and we have a legal system that shields people like that. So people can release that information to me confidentially, and I'm legally and ethically bound to shield them from
being exposed.
Being exposed, exactly. And there's so many stories that are important stories covered by newspapers and television and radio in our history, that if it weren't for laws like that, if it weren't for journalists willing to shield their sources, that those stories wouldn't have come to light, and we would be a poorer democracy for it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Carlos Pedraza, thank you so much for coming on. Axamonitor, Axamonitor.com covers just about everything that's in the world of Axanar and then some, I guess. It stretches out into some of that fandom and some of those ancillary aspects. And, and Carlos, keep us up to date, too, on what's happening with the lawsuit, not the lawsuit, but I guess with the cease and desist, which is probably all it's ever going to be, which I hope that's all it ever is. But otherwise, it's going to be very messy for Alec Peters, I think. And, but thank you for all the stuff that you do as well. I mean, you dedicate a lot of your extra time. This isn't your day job by any stretch of the imagination. You don't make any money doing it. You spent far more money on it than you would have ever made. And, and so it's, I hope you understand, and I'm sure you do, that so many of us appreciate what you do there each and every day. So,
well, thank you. So
thank you for that. So thank you so much, Carlos, for coming on.
All right.
To Carlos Pedraza. He is the editor-in-chief of Axamonitor, which you can find at axamonitor.com. Kind of a lively discussion. I hope it was really interesting for you. I mean, it was for me. I don't know. It just depends what you like. And yes, you are watching this episode for free, or you're listening to this episode for free as well. It will always be free. You don't have to worry about it jumping behind our paywall. But there is more like this to come when the second season of Alpha Waves Radio starts. You can find the second season of Alpha Waves Radio on our Patreon site. That's at patreon.com/Alpha Waves Radio. That is Patreon, patreon.com/alpha, which is ALPHA, waves, WAVES, radio. When I think we all know how to spell that, right? I hope so. And there you can join for as little as $1 a month, which is always a big help, because it's not inexpensive to produce a show like this, especially to do a video version of it. And it takes a lot of time and different energies and everything else, and we hope that you will help join and support what we're trying to put together here. And I think it'd be great for you to be able to see that and for us to share that with you. So that's at patreon.com/Alpha Waves Radio. The second season of Alpha Waves Radio, it starts on August 13th, and that's a special day. It's at least for me, maybe not for you, but it is for me, because August 13th, 2019 is going to be the 21st anniversary of the launch of Sci-Fi Portal, which later became Airlock Alpha, and unfortunately it's kind of just sitting there now. It still exists, it just hasn't been updated in a long time, at least a few years now. But that was the site that kind of brought all of this together. That's what makes Alpha Waves Radio what it is, at least. And we hope that you will have a chance to join Gary Morgenstein. He was in the first season. We talked a lot about his Sharknado work and everything else that he's been doing in a new book. But he and I are actually going to talk about what it was like to do sci-fi. It's been 10 years now, actually, since NBC Universal bought the Sci-Fi name from me and renamed the network. Believe it or not, I can't believe it. And you probably can't either. But Gary Morgenstein is going to be our first guest, and we have some other great stuff right after that each week. So make sure you find us at patreon.com/Alpha Waves Radio. I'm Michael Hinman. See you soon.